Let me introduce our featured speaker today. Scott Shapiro, I have come to find out, actually got his law degree at Lewis and Clark School of Law, or he attended Lewis and Clark School of Law.
Both, and actually my legal writing professor is in the audience.
Ah. Wow. So you better...
This is how connected the school remains with its alumni.
You better be very articulate today then. Scott has extensive experience on this issue, not just in California, but really all over the country. He provides special counsel to the Multnomah County Drainage District through its legal advisors, Miller Nash. And Scott was going to be here in town speaking on another issue, and I think it was Reed Wagner who said, hey, this guy's, really knowledgeable, and if he's already going to be in town, let's take advantage of it. So we're really pleased to have him here today. He's been advising clients. He's an attorney and has been advising clients on large flood protection improvement projects for years in California's Central Valley. Two of his larger projects include work with the Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority and the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency. And those projects together have resulted in more than $1 billion worth of improvements. And those monies, by the way, came not just from the local folks, but also from the state and from the feds. So don't faint or fall over when you hear that number. He's been the lead counsel on various flood insurance rate map appeals, and has also been involved in drafting legislation related to the National Flood Insurance Program. Lastly, Scott has worked with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and sits on their National Section 408 Task Force. So he brings a wealth of experience. We can all take advantage of that this afternoon. And please help me welcome Scott Shapiro.
Well, good afternoon. While I'm pulling up my PowerPoint, I'm going to note that it says that it's gone now, but it said that I'm an expert, and I saw that on the signs out in the lobby, so I sent it to my mother. I haven't heard back from her yet, but the reason I bring it up is, I remarked on this to someone earlier, that being an expert in this field basically means you've been doing what you guys are doing for at least 10 years. So I'm just 10 years ahead of you. It's not that I'm any smarter or have any better ability to deal with these problems. It's just that I've seen more of them. And my hope in having this conversation today is to share with you some of what I've learned over the years, and maybe make what for me was a 10-year journey into a 4 or 5 year journey for you, and you'll have the benefit of that and then can share that with others as well. I do want to start with understanding who's in the audience. Steve asked who's from Portland and who's outside of Portland. Let's ask a few more questions. Who here is on the board of a drainage district, dike district, or a similar entity? Okay, and who here is a professional that works for a drainage district, dike district, etc.? Okay, any consultants? All right, and who's left? Just shout out if you didn't raise your hand what kind of background you bring to this experience. Government types, okay, a state senator. Counties, okay. Utilities.
City council.
Okay. Counties, anything else? Okay, so an Army Corps of Engineers. Hi, Kevin. I met you outside of the senator's office in DC. Good to see you again. So that's great. There's a nice background, and in fact, I would argue that the mix of people that you have in this room, including state representatives, the Army Corps of Engineers, local electeds, local professionals, consultants, is pretty much the mix of people that need to come together to solve problems. It can't be done if you just look at one silo with just one group that's within that bunch. And that's really the theme that I'm going to talk about today. So I've divided my remarks up into 5 categories. We're going to talk about the old days, which is the model that existed when all of our systems were constructed which I would argue doesn't really exist very effectively right now. I'm going to give you some examples of regional approaches around the country that have come together to solve some of these problems, and that's going to be perhaps the biggest chunk of this, with a number of different categories within regional approaches. I'm going to talk about new opportunities, and in particular, some provisions of WRDA, which is the new federal act that authorizes certain federal actions and local connections to federal actions, and what you might think about doing under those provisions. I'm going to talk a little bit about FEMA and how FEMA traditionally looks at these issues and some of the most effective ways to communicate with FEMA and to communicate with your locals. And then a few final lessons, a few summaries of the war wounds, if you will, from going through this experience and trying to tell you where I think you have the ability to go. So we'll start with the good old days. And in the old days, the Army Corps of Engineers had a much more significant project development role than it does now. In fact, back in those days, the Army Corps was an aggressive construction agency and really built flood control projects or incorporated existing projects into new projects around the country, and built an incredible complex of flood control projects around the country. And really not to any fault of folks at the local level and for the Kevins of the Corps, the world has changed a bit in our nation, and it has hamstrung the Corps' ability to get projects done. One are just the budget realities. I don't have the exact statistics, but if you look at all the federal projects that are authorized to be constructed right now, and you may know that the federal government has a two-step process. Congress has to authorize something for money to be spent on it, and then separately has to appropriate money to be spent. So if you look at all the authorized projects, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 or $60 billion a project right now that could be constructed, that Congress has said, yes, we want you to go do it, Army Corps of Engineers. And then when you look at how much the Corps actually receives from Congress to construct those projects, the numbers are under $1 billion a year. And I don't remember what they are now, but it might be $250 million in construction funds. Kevin, does that sound in the right neighborhood nationally? There's dollars for dredging, and there's dollars for deferred O&M, and there's dollars for studies, but the actual construction dollars are really quite small. And that's simply a function of our national budgetary approach right now, which is we're running deficits. It's a function of dysfunction within Congress and the fact that people can't agree on things. And so that budget reality has really changed the Army Corps of Engineers' role from a role of being a construction entity to also being a regulator in many cases, and we'll talk about that a little later. Second is Katrina. Again, Katrina was a national disaster. It was an unbelievable scope of death and destruction, and unfortunately, in this day and age of blame, following the Katrina disaster, the Army Corps of Engineers was called to testify dozens of times in Congress, and was asked to explain why there were failures and who had caused the failures. And whether the Corps was or wasn't responsible for it, and I actually don't believe the Corps had significant responsibility at all, that whole environment can scare people. It can make them say, we're going to be more conservative in how we go ahead in the future. And so that conservatism that came out of Katrina also causes costs to go up, because when you're more conservative, by definition, it's more expensive. And then the regulatory state has come on in a very strong way. We have increasing demands on the same resources around the country. In California, for example, we have an amazing bypass system that shunts about 85% of the water of the Sacramento River around the city of Sacramento into this amazing bypass. And the bypass was constructed as a flood control facility. That was its only purpose. Now, people are looking for it to solve water supply problems through recharging the groundwater basin and running water through it as a way to get around fish issues. They're looking for it to provide habitat for fish and other species. They're looking for it to be a recreation facility. People are looking to grow crops in it. People are looking to take the land they own and turn it into habitat to make money off of it. Well, when you have those competing demands, it gets very difficult to run a flood control project. And the regulatory state aspect, National Environmental Policy Act, Clean Water Act, the wetlands requirements of the Clean Water Act, you just go on and on, it really makes it more complicated. And so all of these factors has led to a significant slowdown in the Army Corps of Engineers' ability to be a contractor out constructing things by itself. And my story is one of how local communities have recognized that, and instead of saying, federal government, we're looking to you to solve our problems, they now look and say, federal government, we're looking to partner with you on solving our problems together. And that involves a series of strategies where some things you do by yourself, and some things you do in forming the Corps, and some things you do in partnership with the Corps, and we get better together. And that's really what we're going to talk about. So this is one of my favorite cartoons. If you can't read the print at the bottom, it says, looks like it's clearing up, maybe we should get started again. And this is about the approach that our nation seems to have on flood control issues. We pay attention to them only after there's a flood, and as soon as the flood's over, we seem to forget about them, just as this couple seems to have forgotten about the fact that they're sitting in this much water. And so one of the things is you seem to have a moment right now in this state. You have a moment that is being caused in many ways by FEMA remapping. You will have moments in the future which will be created by a devastating event somewhere in the country. Hopefully no one gets hurt. Hopefully it's far from here. But you have to capitalize on those moments and build the public support while those moments exist.